the Los Angeles Chargers hired Joe Lombardi to be their new offensive coordinator. And of course, this is a big deal because they need to maximize Justin Herbert while he's on his rookie contract. And they really have no room to mess up a hire. And are you worried at all about Joe Lombardi being the Chargers' new offensive coordinator, or were you okay with the move?
I will say I am slightly worried. He has not had success in other opportunities, though he's worked with some good quarterbacks. I'll give him credit. He's worked with Matt Stafford. He's worked with Drew Brees. So he's been around good quarterbacks. So I think that's a positive of him coming to this young quarterback and bring him a lot of knowledge. I know Coach Staley thinks very highly of him. They worked together in the past, and bringing him into the offensive coordinator role is, says a lot about how much he trusts Lombardi in that role. And one other positive I will say is there's definitely going to be no question Justin Herbert is going to be slinging the rock. He is going to be throwing the football. That's been a staple of Joe Lombardi. Everywhere he's been, in Detroit especially, he threw the ball at ridiculous rates with Matthew Stafford. Granted, with Calvin Johnson, it's kind of hard not to throw the ball, but there's no question Justin Herbert's going to throw the ball. Maybe a little bit too much. My concern is that he hasn't had much success elsewhere, especially with a guy who I think was super talented in Matthew Stafford and Calvin Johnson. So it's a risky move, and I don't know if a risky move was the best thing to go after with a guy like Justin Herbert, who, I think it would have been smarter to bring in a more set infrastructure, if that makes sense.
For me, I'm kind of split between the middle because I think Joe Lombardi, his resume speaks for itself, right? When you look at the New Orleans aspect of his resume, it jumps out at you. He's been a quarterback coach for the Saints for 5 years. He's worked with Drew Brees. Drew Brees speaks very highly of Joe Lombardi. Sean Payton does as well. And then when you get into the Detroit Lions aspect of his coaching career, it kind of goes downhill. 2 underwhelming years. He didn't even last 2 seasons. In 2014, Detroit had the 22nd ranked offense. And in 2015, they had the 18th ranked offense, but Joe Lombardi was fired after a 1-6 start after just 7 games because the offense was not performing. Matthew Stafford had some of his lowest quarterback ratings of his career when he was paired up with Joe Lombardi. And I know the argument that a lot of people like to use for that is everybody does bad in Detroit. That may be true, but not everybody outside of Matthew Stafford does bad in Detroit, because Matthew Stafford has been the most consistent player for the Lions for the past 10 seasons. We know he's with the Rams now, and when you look at Matthew Stafford's Lions career, the worst 2 seasons outside of his rookie year were the years that Joe Lombardi was the offensive coordinator. So that does scare me, and they had good talent. They had Eric Ebron, who did have a problem catching the ball. He dropped a lot of balls. Golden Tate was there. Calvin Johnson. They had a good receiving core. Jock Bell was their running back. I don't know what type of scheme they're going to bring to the Chargers yet, because in Detroit, it was mostly like a power run scheme. But with the Chargers, I think it's going to be more spread. I listened to Joe Lombardi's introductory interview press conference with the Chargers, and I liked the things that he said. He said that he's going to try to build an offense around Justin Herbert. Brandon Staley and Joe Lombardi have chemistry together because Joe Lombardi was Brandon Staley's OC in college. Brandon Staley was a former quarterback. So that's a plus, but this wasn't the move to sell me on Justin Herbert is going to be the MVP, because I think the talent is there. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler is going to be back. I think they fixed the offensive line, but the only thing that's making me hold my tongue in regards to Justin Herbert having an MVP-like year next season is Joe Lombardi. If it was any other accomplished coordinator in the NFL, I would have said Herbert is the guy. But because it is Joe Lombardi, I'm kind of taken aback a little bit, and I want to see how it goes. I want to see what happens in free agency, because Trey Turner is probably getting cut or traded. So they have to fill a guard spot. They have to get a tackle outside of Bulaga. They have to get a left tackle. They have to get a center. They have to fill every position on that offensive line outside of Bulaga. So it's going to be tough.
Yeah, and I think one of the worst moves of this offseason, although a young offseason for them, is losing Pep Hamilton. He was so instrumental to Justin Herbert's growth this past season, and he was the one guy that I really wanted to see them keep aboard on that coaching staff. And for Lombardi, I think one of his Achilles' heels was not being willing to adjust. I think he tried to use the same offense in Detroit that he used in New Orleans, and it didn't work out as well with Matt Stafford as it did for Drew Brees. So if he goes to Los Angeles, is he going to try and just force the same system on Herbert, even if he's not working? Because I think he's kind of similar in skill set to a Matt Stafford type player rather than more of a Drew Brees. So if the system isn't working, is he going to be willing to work with Justin Herbert and figure out what works for him? Or is he going to be dead set on implementing his system, everybody else be damned? So that's a concern for me.
In 23 games under Joe Lombardi, Matthew Stafford averaged 266 yards per game. He threw 34 touchdowns and 21 interceptions and completed 61% of his passes. In 23 games after Lombardi was fired, Stafford averaged 266 yards per game, so the same yardage per game, but he threw 42 touchdowns and only 12 interceptions, and he completed 67% of his passes. So he took care of the ball way better after Lombardi was gone. Is that just Stafford not being a good decision maker? Lombardi's play calling? We can't really tell. I haven't watched the film yet. I haven't went back and watched Detroit Lions 2014 season, so I really can't say, and I can't give a definitive answer. But I think it is a concern. We'll see what happens, though, because, in the press conference, Joe Lombardi did say, Sean Payton says this all the time, familiarity is better than ability. And Staley and Lombardi are very familiar with each other. They have a relationship already, which I think is a huge plus. You want your coaching staff to get along with each other. As Jets fans, we know when Adam Gase was the coach, they forced Greg Williams onto him. Adam Gase couldn't pick his own coaching staff, and I think that had a lot to do with Adam Gase's failure as a head coach. But Brandon Staley gets to pick his own guys, so at this point, it's just trusting in him. The good thing about it is that I think even if we don't see a great season by the offense, I think that defense is going to be great because the Chargers have an identical personnel to what the Rams had when we talk about defense. Derwin James is the perfect safety for what Brandon Staley wants to do on defense. So I think as a whole, their defense is going to be one of the top defenses in the league. It's really if that offense can take that next step.
Yeah, and I think defense was the way to go for a head coach. I would have liked for them to have brought in a more sure thing as the offensive coordinator, but I think shoring up that defense is going to make Justin Herbert look much better because as great as he looked last season, the reason the wins weren't coming is because the defense couldn't get a stop. So I think that defense improving is going to make Herbert look a lot better this season.